The sanctity of human life is under assault. Find out how and what you can do about it in this edition of Life Matters with Brian Johnston, Western Regional Director of the National Right to Life Committee.
Welcome back to Life Matters. We're your program on life, on culture, and the very real and present battle of ideas. And if you don't think you're involved in a battle of ideas, then it may be too late for you. Because there are ideas that are being presented to you by the culture, by the media, all around you. And those ideas are seeking to make their way into your head, into your way of thinking, into your values. And if you aren't cognizant of that, then you've lost. You have already lost. And in the battle for your mind, you've been taken captive through the futility of trying to make sense of all the ideas that our culture is pushing at you. So our program deals very specifically with the implications of the right to life and how it impacts all of culture and society. Today's program is a follow-on to an earlier program on Ireland, the last outpost of civilization. And if you hear that music, you can tell that Ireland is important to me. My folks came from Ireland after World War II. I was the first born here, and I'm very glad that I'm an American. And the values that America is built on are values that came not only from Europe, they clearly did, and specifically from a unique corner of Europe, and that happens to be the English system of not just common law, but more specifically of limited government through the Magna Carta. There was no Magna Carta on the continent. The limitation on the king, if you wanted to get rid of the king, you had to kill the king. But in Britain, they said, no, we don't mind there being someone in charge, but there has to be defined limits and defined standards and defined principles that the government must follow. And the Magna Carta from 1215 has resonated through history, and the founders of the U.S. adopted those principles and codified and refined them. And you know that the American form of government is very unique in the world. So it's not just the European traditions, more to the point that many have said it before me, that the American experiment represents the aspirations of mankind, and people come from all over the world to the United States of America because America affirms that every human life has intrinsic value and worth. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're endowed by our Creator. We're not endowed by the government. We're endowed by our Creator with these certain inalienable rights. And the very first one is the right to be alive, the right to exist. And sometimes governments want to take that from you. So it's a good thing our founders put that principle in. Now, where did it come from? As I said, it emanated from some of the ideas in Europe. But Europe, my friends, is collapsing. And the reason now that I'm talking about Ireland is that in many ways, Ireland is the last outpost, at least in Europe, the very last outpost of Western civilization. After our first program, a friend of mine asked me to expand on this more. And I think it is important because many of us do not understand what is meant by civilization. We confuse civilization with technological advancement, with literature, with the arts, with now the digital age, that somehow we're more civilized. But that is not the premise of Western civilization. And we talked about last time and why Europe is significant. Europe actually has faced the perversion of civilization for a while. We know Nazi Germany violated the rights of mankind. They committed crimes against humanity. It wasn't just that they warred against other countries. In the Nuremberg trials, they were declared to have violated the basic premise of civilization, protecting their own innocent. So civilization means much more than technology. And we're going to examine this now. As I said, this is about Ireland. Ireland's significant right now because it's the last nation in all of Europe to continue to protect its own babies. In the rest of Europe, you can routinely dismiss the value of a baby's life if you want to. In fact, in many cases, the government tells you to, and the government pays for the killing of that baby. Only Ireland has held out against that. And as you know, the United States has held out against that idea until 73. In 1973, the federal government stepped in and removed all protections for innocent babies in all the 50 states. But back to Europe. I want to remind you what's happening in Ireland right now. And while we are recording this in 2018 and looking at the important vote that'll take place on May 25th of 2018 in Ireland, that vote would overturn the 8th Amendment of the Irish Constitution. which guarantees the right to life to children in the womb. By overturning that decision, then Europe will be united in its disregard for innocent human lives. See, Ireland is a shining example of something unique, of values that are unique, that made Western civilization great. It isn't our technology that makes us great. And again, my friend said, please drive that home. There's something here. And so I'm glad to do that. As we talk about Ireland's decision on May 25th of 2018, we recognize that Europe itself has in a sense already fallen. If you haven't followed what's happening in Europe, Europe is declining in a dramatic way. It's well below its population growth. The only population it's been getting, and this has been quite a problem, has been from immigration, many from value systems and countries that don't share that common bond, and there's huge conflict on the European continent over these things. But I'm not even dealing with that. I'm talking about the decline in respect for human life, because that's the premise of Western Civ. Again, go back if you want to go to the podcast on Western civilization. You may be listening on radio. We have a podcast, lifematters.life, and we go into depth on what is Western civilization. And the Irish story kind of helps underscore that, because in Ireland, they're fighting for the basic premise of civilization. And I'm going to include again an interview with an Irish parliamentarian, and this particular parliamentarian really gets to the core of what government's about. It's really why we have government. It is to protect those that can't protect themselves. And all other political aspects aside, this man is caught in a battle. He was punished by his political party for breaking with that party. His political party, the Sinn Féin party, does not support protecting babies in the womb, and he was removed from his political party. He had quite a ranking position there. So this man, Peter Tobin, has paid a price, but I admire him greatly because he understands deeper issues. There are deeper things at stake. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Irish vote, why it's significant for you, why it's significant in the battle of ideas, why the collapse of European civilization is very real. Many people don't realize that Rome fell, and with that came the Dark Ages, as you know. It's referred to as the Dark Ages in medieval times. But with the fall of Rome, many people in Rome didn't know it was falling. It collapsed from within because of its values. It lost its sense of purpose, and if Romans had bread and circuses, and that's just a phrase for being fed and entertained, a lot of Americans are content to be fed and entertained, but that's not the reason we have government. So the collapse of culture is upon us, and if you don't recognize it, you won't see it, and it'll be gone. We'll come back, and we're going to talk about why Ireland is the last outpost of civilization.
Life Matters continues after this.
You know, you're pretty amazing. The reason I can say that is America's founders said that about you. That's right. They said that every human being is created by a creator and given rights by that creator. Those rights are not given by the government. It's the government's job to protect those rights. And the very first and most important is the right to be alive, the right to life. If you want to be involved in the national effort, go to nrlc.org.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. Again, your program on life, on culture, and the very real and present battle of ideas. Most people don't see this battle. They're content to go about their life and accept things as they are, that somehow progress is taking care of them and they'll be taken care of. Again, like the Romans of ancient time, if they have food and entertainment, what else matters? If they had bread and circuses, then the government was doing its job. But Rome was falling, and they didn't realize it. And civilization itself was falling. They were not cognizant of that. They did not understand that battle of ideas. You need to understand that, and Ireland is a great parable for that. Because Ireland still protects the lives of children in the womb. It uses its laws to protect those that can't protect themselves. An important principle that's been refined and developed throughout Western civilization is the aspiration of Western civilization. The finest expression of that aspiration of all of Western Civ was in the establishing of the United States of America. And they established it not based on their race, despite what you're told in many schools and colleges. They established it based on ideas. They established the values of America not based on the tribal inclination, you got to be one of us, even though you're lectured to about that. No, they established it based on the idea that everyone has intrinsic value and worth. And they learned that from the efforts of Western civilization. So you've inherited those values. Those values and laws and traditions are now in your hands. And if you don't understand what they are, you can lose them. Just as the Roman Empire fell and most Roman citizens didn't understand what was happening, that's the case in Western Civ. That's what's happened in all of Europe. Europe has descended in many ways into a technologically advanced, but an ethically and civilizationally corrupt and darkened time. And so this lack of respect, again, in Europe, it's not uncommon for euthanasia to be widely practiced. It's not uncommon to dismiss the value of that human baby. Only Ireland still protects the lives of the vulnerable. And on May the 25th of 2018, a vote will take place. Ireland, up to now, has the most productive economy for its size per capita. It's also the most growing. It has the youngest population. They have the lowest death rate. They don't kill people. I was just in Ireland and visited with a couple of my relatives. My Aunt Frances is 97. My Uncle Tom is 89. And they're doing well. It's very impressive. And the elderly are revered in Ireland still. And in many cultures, that reverence continues, but it's being taken slowly but surely. And if you don't recognize how that reverence for life is being taken, then you're going to lose it. So Ireland's vote is going to determine a lot for Ireland, but also whether or not Europe will have a standard, will have a bright light, will have a country that still values the innocent and vulnerable. Now, I want to present Ireland in a way, it's a living story. I'm not making this up. This vote's going to happen. You're going to hear the interview with Mr. Tobin. But parables and stories tell us a lot, and I had a good friend who was very much into the Lord of the Rings story. And you may not realize this, but both J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were big fans of Western civilization, but not in the way that you think. They recognized what we're talking about, that what makes you civilized is how you live with the values, codes, mores, and laws that you embrace. And that if the values, codes, mores, and laws view human beings as disposable things that can be controlled by a centralized government, that's a very, very evil world. That's a dystopia. Even if it seems ideal, even if technology is used to accomplish great things, it's still dystopic. And in many ways, Ireland is not unlike the Shire in the Tolkien stories, where the littlest of people have to confront a great evil which was coming, a centralized system, an all-seeing system that viewed all other living things, particularly human beings from our point of view, but the diversity of human beings were things to serve the centralized authority and government. And our founders thought about that too. They realized that government derives its just powers, not from its authority, but from the lives of the governed. So in the Tolkien story, you saw a humble little person from far away, the furthest outpost, going and bringing certain truths to bear and recognizing that a centralized authority that does not respect and value life is not legitimate. And so that's a parable in and of itself. You know, in Life Matters, we talk about culture. So we're into stories. We talk about the battle of ideas. And, you know, often stories are the best way to get deeper ideas across. Jesus told parables. If you go back and look, he told stories, and often he did not explain them. And he would quote scriptures to demons, and he'd quote scriptures to, the religious scriptures, they're good. He would quote them to the Pharisees, because that's where they lived. But to normal people, he told them stories. And so we like stories too. They carry so much more. We're seeing a living parable now, what's happening in Ireland. We're seeing this fight for basic principles in what is just government, what's the just role of government. Another great story you may know, and I think she hit the same issue as a young 16-year-old girl wrote a great story. Mary Shelley, when she was 16, wrote the story of Frankenstein. And it was about how medical ethics had been merged with the Industrial Revolution and Hegelian progressivism, if you will. Because that's really what's taken over Europe right now, is Hegelian progressivism has brought Europe into a self-destructive point of view. I've talked about Hegel before. I have to talk about Hegel because if you don't understand that Hegel uses the idea of progress and imbues it with a moral quality. This is very important because that's animating your culture right now. The problem is that what is progress? If you don't know where you're going, if you get on Interstate 5 or some motorway in Europe and you're on that highway and say, we're making progress, if you don't know what your actual destination is, then movement and change may not be progress. Movement and change may be taking you someplace you don't want to go. So just because there's change doesn't mean it's good. And yet the idea of progressivism is to proclaim that this change is progress, change itself is in and of itself good. A very dangerous idea, and you're living it. You see it in America, in this notion of progressivism. But this is not a new idea. Hegel is what animated Marxism. They wanted change, and it's really a call for redistribution, the new form of justice. It animated National Socialism, that certain people had been oppressed and there needed to be change, and we needed to move forward and progress towards the freedom for that particular race, in that case, the German people. And that became and created a dystopia, a truly evil centralized government. Mary Shelley told a story, and in it, Frankenstein, she talks about how medical ethics that is used without a defined guideline is incredibly terrifying, incredibly dangerous. When we come back, we're going to bring all this right back to what's happening in Ireland. Right now, little Ireland, the last outpost of civilization, is trying to hold on to the values that made Europe and Western civilization great, because there's been a decline, and that decline is all around you as well. We want you to see that as we talk about Life Matters.
Life Matters continues after this.
Life Film Fest is the creative outreach in Hollywood that's changing Hollywood and the culture. There's many films you've already seen that actually had their start at Life Fest in Hollywood. But more than that, we work with people throughout the industry who want to creatively bring the message of life, creatively impact the culture so that hearts and minds of our fellow citizens understand the depth of what the right to life really is. Be part of Life Fest Film Festival and make a difference.
Go to lifefilmfest.com. And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. Again, this is our Irish program. We're talking about the last outpost of civilization, where Ireland is trying to continue to protect vulnerable babies in the womb. The rest of Europe, vulnerable babies are thrown out routinely. And, of course, grandma and grandpa, the sick and elderly, and even the depressed are killed in the rest of Europe under the law. And by medicine itself. Supposedly what's meant to heal is used to kill. And so there's been a descent in Europe, a descent into a darkness of different values. Yes, they have technology, but the basis of a civilized life is not there. And the civilization that you saw, we talked about stories and how in the Shire, J.R.R. Tolkien talks about the simple life of the Shire. But those values reflected the values of civilization, that every life was significant, that allowed joy, that allowed people to be productive. And technology itself was not worshipped. Technology is a great thing, by the way. I use it all the time. But if it's not used properly, it can be terrifying. And Tolkien wrote of that. That's really what you saw in the culture that they were up against, the advancement of that dark culture. They actually created new human beings, part man and part animal. The evil that was there, that all-seeing centralized power without ethical guidelines, was extremely dangerous. C.S. Lewis told stories too. In fact, I love C.S. Lewis. I have a 5-foot shelf of books. He wrote a few fantasies, the Space Trilogy, a great trilogy, the Paralandra stories, or if you haven't read them, obviously Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, but you see a theme in these stories. And again, the purpose of stories is to open your eyes to deeper issues that you may not see otherwise, issues that surround you at the very moment. And that's why Jesus told stories. That's why you go to the movies. Movies are the parables right now of our culture. They're there to tell you stories and to help you see deeper issues that if they're spelled out too much, you won't recognize them. But they're very deep issues. Again, C.S. Lewis talked about in The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, a centralized authority. Lewis himself, he was born in Ireland, by the way, but he was a bit of a Brit, and he didn't have fault with royalty. But he did have fault with the abuse of centralized power. So in The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, there was a queen, a white witch. And she wanted to centralize all power and denigrated the diversity of lives in that particular world of Narnia. They were all to serve her, and it brought a coldness and a destruction and the hope that had been in Narnia wasn't there until, as you know, the return of Aslan. Well, that's another story. You're living in a story right now, and you're watching it from a distance. We want you to watch what's happened in Ireland and how Ireland right now, the youngest country in Europe, the most vibrant country in all of Europe, is the final country that does not allow the wanton killing of babies. That's going to be decided by a public vote. So I just returned from Ireland. I want you to hear again an interview from Radio Telefís Éireann with an interesting member of the Dáil. The Dáil is the Irish Parliament. This debate is happening now, and the government is forcing a public vote. But in Ireland, there's not a deeper examination. When the public votes, it's heavily influenced by the media in Ireland. And so this is an important interview, and I want you to see that this man, I don't agree with him on all of his policies, but he understands the purpose of government, and he's willing to fight for it. And the interviewer says, well, that's just personal. And yet Mr. Tobin goes back and he points out, no, these are the basic principles of government.
Before we came on air, we contacted Peadar Tóibín, the Sinn Féin TD. He is, as we said, part of the Cherish All the Children Equally group. Before we came on air, I asked him about that campaign and why he was supporting it.
Well, first of all, just to say that I'm speaking in my own capacity here, that Sinn Féin have a policy where they seek to repeal the eighth, and they're campaigning strongly in that direction. I obviously have a different view. Cherish All the Children Equally is a human rights campaign that's been formed by progressives, Republicans, trade unionists throughout the 32 counties who are looking to make sure that, one, there is equality for all children. So there's obviously with abortion, you don't have equality of outcome because one child survives and the other child doesn't. And also to make sure that women who are in difficulties have the proper investment and supports by the state. So we know, for example, last year that under Leo Varadkar and Simon Harris, that there were dozens of pregnant women who were homeless in this country. And we believe that, you know, if the Taoiseach meant business with regards providing supports for these people, he would at the very least put a roof over their heads.
And yet, Peadar Tóibín, your party president, Mary Lou MacDonald, says of the Eighth Amendment, it's an alphabet soup of misery. We cannot tolerate the status quo. It's something that should never have been put into the Constitution, and it's injurious to women. You're directly contrary to her point of view and the party point of view.
Well, I suppose, first of all, to say that there isn't a party, a family, or a work office in the country where there isn't different opinions. And it's very important that people are, I suppose, entitled to their opinions. Like, we've been hearing for years of the necessity to have a debate around abortion. And I'm just saying out loud and clear, I think that everybody should be able to respectfully participate in that debate. And, you know, differences of opinions are not a bad thing. Healthy discussion on these issues is actually a positive. We're more likely to achieve a better referendum outcome when people are able to participate. Now, I've spoken to a large number of obstetricians and doctors who have told me that in their working lives, they have never come across or know of any person, any woman who has lost their lives as a result of the Eighth Amendment. And actual facts that the fact that we have the Eighth Amendment here means we have a far lower abortion rate than, let's say, in Britain.
And many people would perhaps take a contrary view in relation to that. But can I just ask you a further question, please, Peadar Tóibín? How many within Sinn Féin do you believe in the parliamentary party, in local government, and also amongst the grassroots would support your position today?
Well, just on that last point, it's important to remember as well what we've been asked. Fine Gael are asking us to remove the constitutional right of every single unborn child from the Constitution from May 26th this year onwards. There will never be a constitutional protection for any unborn child going forward if there's a yes vote on this. With regards to the rest of my own political party, as I said, there's a broad set of views on this issue. I can only speak for myself, in fairness. It would be wrong for me to speak for anybody else. But I will say one thing. I've been speaking to a lot of people in the trade union movement over the last while, and many people in the trade union movement said to me that they feel that they're strongly pro-life, but that they're in the closet in a way on this issue, and that they don't feel comfortable they don't feel able to participate in this debate. And these are strong, robust individuals who've been involved in many campaigns. And I just think that we need to create the circumstance where people can leave the closet, walk out into the sunshine of this debate, and articulate respectful views, seeking to protect mothers and children. We need to make sure we leave no mother or child behind in this country. This is the human rights issue of our generation.
And
we would
if
never
the
get the
referendum,
opportunity to...
if the referendum, and I'm sorry to cut across you, Peadar Tóibín,
Sure.
but if the referendum were passed, would you vote against subsequent legislation allowing for the termination of pregnancy, perhaps up to 12 weeks?
Well, I suppose you've asked me a triple hypothetical question there, because we don't know the results of the referendum, what position the Sinn Féin will take at the upcoming Ordesh, and we don't know for sure exactly what's going to happen in the Dáil on this. And this is one of the key questions. There is no certainty whatsoever with regards to what will happen to the Dáil. The Dáil is very fractured in this issue, and all we know at the moment is that every single child, healthy or unhealthy, will have their constitutional rights to life taken away from them before they're born from May 26th if this referendum passes.
By the end of this Dáil term, do you expect to be suspended from Sinn Féin for a second time over the issue of women's rights in relation to abortion, or women's rights to choose in relation to abortion, or indeed you were suspended previously on the protection of life during pregnancy bill?
Well, let me say that it's really important that everybody has the right to life. That's the most important right. If you don't have the right to life, you don't really have any other rights.
But do you expect to
denies them. With regards to my future, with regards to my future in Sinn Féin, I believe that Sinn Féin is absolutely the only vehicle that exists to achieve my dual objectives of a united Ireland and a prosperous, equal economy. And I am fully invested in that project. And I have no doubt that when this debate is over and we focus on the future, that I'll have my shoulder behind the Sinn Féin wheel at that stage.
And you're confident you can stay in the party and still express that deeply personal conviction around around abortion services, potential abortion services in this country, and survive within your party and vote according to your own conscience in the Dáil?
Well, first of all, that I will say this, that I am confident of my future in the party. Some people have said, would you not just protect your political career on this issue? My issue is very simple. For me, this is a vulnerable individual, living human being. I have the choice to walk past and do nothing, or to get involved and save that child's life.
Again, this is a story, but it's not a story. This is about real laws and real life. This is about the actual fall of Europe and the values that made Europe great. It's happening as we speak. You see a centralized government trying to force people to adopt laws, mores, and values that dismisses human life. That's happened at other times in history. It's a dystopia. So we don't want to celebrate progress for its own sake if human beings are destroyed in the process. Welcome to the world of Life Matters, because Life Matters is about life. And if you don't think about what's at stake in the right to life issue, in the policies of your state and nation, if you aren't willing to stand up for those who can't speak for themselves, as Mr. Tobin is willing to do, if you don't do that, then it can be lost. And just as all of Europe after the collapse of Rome fell into a dark and confused cultural era, that can happen here with you. And the advancement in technology can actually be a frightening thing if it's used against human lives. Thanks for listening.
Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life.